I told them to bear strong testimony to their friends that the LDS Church is the one true church, and that as a result of this weekend of activity, we'd like to see them get wet. Some felt that this might scare some potential converts away. I tried to discourage this type of thinking by reminding them that beating around the bush is a form of deception. It would be far better to scare them away before the testimony meeting than during the testimony meeting. Apparently, no one was scared away. The testimony meeting was jam-packed. It was held on the day following the Letterman concert. During this meeting, the student body president from Moses Lake High School, Steve Williams, stood up after the Letterman and myself and President Don C. Wood of the Northwestern States LDS Mission had all delivered addresses to the crowd. He actually walked up out of the audience and asked for some time to speak. He told how he was sorry that he had not listened to his Mormon friends sooner, and would it be all right if plans were made for his forthcoming baptism into the true church of the Lord Jesus Christ. Altogether, there were 127 convert baptisms at last count that followed this one meeting. This is to say nothing of the hundreds of lives that were touched and made stronger by the outpouring of the Spirit of God at this meeting. I felt amazed to the very depths of my soul when I thought back how the Lord had led me to this place and how I felt my life was being wasted, especially to be driven to such a God-forsaken place as Moses Lake, Washington. I knew now for certain that I was on the track of something very important to the Lord. I was most relieved to see that my plan was His plan. The years have passed. Many are they that have remarked to me of their conversion on that blessed day. One girl introduced me to her entire family some years later, and they had all joined because of having attended that one solitary event. They had been very active ever since. In the years that followed, this type of revolutionary proselyting spread to the entire church, and because the Northwestern States Mission under President Wood made use of this method almost weekly, that mission led the church's missions in convert baptisms for a very long time. The letterman told me later of several other trips for the same purpose, and of one in Idaho where so many people came to their testimony meeting that they had to wire speakers outside of the building, and the whole neighborhood was thrust into one giant testimony meeting. Now you should know that any idea this good has got to be from the Lord. And you should also know that any idea from the Lord that begins to take hold among the children of men will surely come under fire from the other side of the front in the battle lines of the testimony war. And when Satan wants to destroy something, first he gives it a crummy-sounding label. Instead of calling these faith-promoting youth conferences, Satan began to label them as, quote, drum-beating youth campaigns. And the members of the church began to reject these drum-beating youth campaigns because, quote, such high-pressure tactics produce converts that don't last, so they said. Then they would cry out, a man has to be converted the old, slow way. You have to sit down and teach him one thing at a time, or he can't grasp what you're teaching him. As I have listened so many times to such points, I have been impressed with the truth in this thought: Satan will tell 9 truths to convince you of one lie. Give to me 1,000 reasons why the church should not engage in youth conferences like the one in Moses Lake, and I will give you back one reason why we should. And in 2 words I can state that one reason: it works. I have tried to persuade a mission president in another mission to do what President Wood was doing to convert large numbers of people to the church, and sadly beheld that mission president standing up and beating down hard on his desk, exclaiming, no, there will be no drum-beating youth campaigns in this mission while I am the president. He was right. There were no drum-beating youth campaigns while he was president, and there would have been no drums beaten and no youths campaigned into the churches located in that mission were it not for the fact that this man was replaced within about 2 weeks. He was replaced by a man who thought it would be terrific if we had some faith-promoting youth conferences, and no one will ever tell me that prayers are not answered. It will be a sad day for all of us, self-included, when we each find out just exactly how much we have held up the growth of the kingdom of God. And watch out. I am sure that God will give us a pictorial tour through each such event in our lives so that our growth may be complete. Yes, one day we will have to shrink a little bit, like a new pair of jeans, so our testimonies will fit properly. I had much to learn on this subject, and right away. From Moses Lake I moved back to Provo in January 1962. The missile-based job had ended, and I was still in my quest for the funds to attend the first-class FCC licensed school. I picked up a job at a Provo radio station. While attending BYU the preceding year, I had started the first rock and roll record hops ever held at BYU. They were at Cannon Center every Saturday night. On Friday night, I did the same disco-type thing at the East Sharon Steakhouse in Provo. These incredibly successful dances had also become incredibly controversial. This was the year of the twist. David O. McKay, the great Mormon prophet, and President Wilkinson, the little giant of a man that was the president of BYU, had both recommended that the Latter-day Saints not cavort themselves about like that. However, the youth of the church were squarely split right down the middle on whether or not this really was the will of the Lord. If a young person at my dances were from California and attending BYU, he was easy to spot on the dance floor. He was the one who looked like one of Bugs Bunny's Tasmanian devils just out for a night of fancy footwork. Utah's finest youth, on the other hand, would dance one way at church dances and another way at the more public dances. And unfortunately, that is what I meant when I said that they were split right down the middle. As far as I could tell, no one felt that it was a sin to do the twist. To further prepare your minds, you have to remember that at this time about 90% of the adults of the church thought that all rock dancing was of the devil. Whether or not that 90% figure looks exaggerated to you will likely depend upon whether or not you had anything to do with church dances during this period. As for me, I made a nice living putting on church record hops and school dances, and the opposition was interesting to watch. I often gave a little speech to those who attended my dances that they all would do well to follow the wishes of the prophet of God and keep their dancing within respectable limits, and to not do the twist. This led to some very interesting occasions where the kids behaved, the adults were pleased, and the spirit prevailed. But there were some other times. Once at a high council meeting in Provo, I was asked what I thought about the fact that since I had started playing rock music at their church dances, that there had been an increase in the number of beer bottles in the parking lot. The inference was that rock and roll led to boozers, and boozers were not what we wanted at our church dances. To the amazement of a few, I stood up applauding. I told them of a story told to me in Moses Lake, Washington, wherein a general authority attended one of their Saturday night dances, and he noticed a sign that they had displayed prominently at the entrance to the dance. He said, "I really like the sign you have here." Then he took out his pen and lined out one word on the sign. "There now, I like it even better." He had lined out the word "not" from the phrase, "Smokers and drinkers not welcome." I added to this story that I felt that we were really deciding which of our problems we were going to deal with in this city. Are we going to concern ourselves with those of our youth who never come to church anymore and try to win them back? Or are we going to concern ourselves with having a clean parking lot after the dances? A bunch of really fine high councilmen shouted, "Amen." I loved it. But winning one little skirmish in Provo does not mean that you are winning the testimony war. The battle rages on every minute of every hour in every nook and cranny of the globe. During this same year, BYU's student body had managed to select a social vice president with a fetish for hatred toward rock and roll music. To ask him if he thought rock and roll was of the devil would be like asking if Hitler was mean to the Jews. I mean, what could be more obvious? He had managed to amass enough support for his policy that he had succeeded in banning all rock dances from the BYU campus. This was not a BYU ban. It was strictly him exercising unrighteous dominion with his power of office. He sang with a swing band that was somehow hired to do all BYU campus dances. If you liked Stardust, then you would love his band. They were really quite good at that sort of music. If you preferred something livelier, as 99% of the students usually will, then you went off campus to Lynn Bryson's local DJ-type record hops. This set the stage for somewhat of a Cold War. Then came the big showdown. This social veep called me and asked if I would come into his office. He wanted to invite me to come on campus and be part of the BYU All-School Carnival. There would be Ferris wheels and all. And a great big rock hop would be part of the whole beautiful thing. I thought this was a little out of character for him, so I asked the obvious why. I knew there had to be a catch. Well, there was. You see, his swing band would also be there, and he wanted to prove once and for all that when it came to the taste in music of the BYU student body as a whole, he needed to prove that the said student body was of such a dignified nature that they would certainly choose the kind of music that he had been providing for them, and this would lay to rest some criticism that his office had endured from some rather noisy riffraff. No, I didn't gag. I knew that this would be his political suicide, and I agreed to carry the axe for him. The night of the big showdown came. It began to rain. Now that is an important point to consider in light of the fact that his group was setting up outside beneath the glittering lights of the Ferris wheel. My record hop was to have been conducted in the gym, far away from the maddening crowd. Quickly a group of sound experts descended upon my sound system to carry it out into the driving rain. It didn't matter that there would be no shelter for my gear. If I didn't like it, I could cancel. The more important consideration at the moment, I was told, was that it would be a great shame to waste the money that BYU had spent on these fine musicians, and we couldn't both be putting on two different dances in the same place, could we? Obviously, whatever occupied that gym would be the only thing that remained of the all-school carnival after the first half hour of this rain. Would it be fair to mention at this point that there is a scripture that says that the Lord will consecrate all of your afflictions for gain? Fair or not, I asked the Lord to remember that he had made this promise. I had been in contact with so many students pleading for some relief to this awful situation wherein they were being deprived of any suitable dances to go to on the campus. Not everyone had access to transportation to my dances downtown. One student told me of somewhat of a small but permanent migration of several of his friends away from BYU to other universities, and possibly away from the church. Take note of this fact. The church cannot allow itself to become too stuffy, or those whose lifestyles become suffocated in stuffy environments will be big losers in the testimony war. And the church does not need to be stuffy to create an acceptable atmosphere for the Spirit of the Lord. Joseph Smith was not a very stuffy person, not when he threw Sidney Rigdon, one of the brethren, into a mud puddle for trying to hurry him away from a wrestling match and into a meeting of the general authorities. I think there is a big parallel here. We need more Joseph Smiths and fewer stuffed shirts sometimes, don't we? Life is too drab for many of us, and we need a little pizzazz. Now would it be fair to say that the Lord remembered his promise? He certainly consecrated the rain to gain for me. Once the position of the orchestra was firmly entrenched in the gym, it was suddenly as if there had been no rain. Within minutes, everyone at the carnival was cutting loose all of their pent-up emotions and dancing to the greatest rock dance in the entire history of the school. Several moments into the evening, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was him. He said, "Play one more record and that's it," making a motion like an umpire with his hands, then announced that everyone should go into the gym. It was like I was listening to someone who thought he was the principal at a grade school, so I asked, why? There are only 2 couples in the gym, that's why. I can't stand to see everyone out here only because they don't know there is a band in the gym. I'm sure that if they knew there was a band in there, that is where they would be. He just couldn't see what was happening, or what would happen if I made such an announcement. I was afraid that there would be a riot if I made his announcement, or that he would slug me if I didn't make the announcement. So I opted for the riot. I announced that the next record would be the last. The booing was overwhelming until I announced the reason why the next record would be the last. Then the booing became so suppressive to the spirit that I thought that I had better play just one more record after the, quote, last one. Then my friend, the social vice president, really did the wrong thing. In full view of the angry crowd, he pulled the cord on the record player. As the temperature of this crowd shot past the boiling point, I no longer had power to my microphone, so I applied the King Benjamin principle, which is that when you cannot be heard easily, climb up on a chair and raise your arms like Tarzan. The crowd went hush so fast that I nearly fell off of the chair. As I regained my heroic composure and the laughter died down, I delivered this piece de resistance. BYU has suffered long enough under this kind of student leadership. One friend of mine has returned to another college because he deemed BYU to be too socially backward. I do not believe that this is how BYU should be thought of by anyone. I have a great personal interest in seeing this situation made better, since I labored a great many hours converting that young man to the church, and it makes me sad to see that certain Mormons have so much prejudice built into their musical tastes that my friend could not tolerate the smothering of his own tastes. I was invited to put on a badly needed dance at BYU tonight. If I cannot do that which I was invited here to do, then I would like you to know that my roommates are presently taking my place at our radio station's weekly dance at the Park Rocher roller rink in Springville, so that I may accept BYU's invitation to be here tonight. Now, you have all been invited by this man here to go into the gym. You know where you can find me if you want to discuss anything about where you might find a good dance tonight. Bye. I walked 20 feet to my convertible car and sped over the horizon with the entire ASBYU in caravan, minus one stunned and very quiet bunch of tunesmiths. In Springville that evening, I attended one of the best dances ever held on the planet. I thought I had struck a blow for Mom and apple pie, but Monday in the Daily Universe A headline blared across the editorial page, "Belligerent, obnoxious DJ incites near riot at all-school carnival," with the comment in the story that, "We hope this man's actions will not prevent other honorable men of the mic from visiting our campus in the future." I saw that the web was spun so thick and fast that I had best maintain strategic silence. My decision to remain silent was a good one. I was to be defended instead by a large contingent of letters to the editor. One was from a well-known BYU professor who said words to the effect that BYU owed me an apology. I sat back, young man that I was, and beheld with great interest the array of participants on each side of the testimony war. How clever of Satan to get the saints to wage the war against themselves. There can be no question about it. The saints have been successfully divided on the issue of rock and roll music, and when troops are divided, they can be more easily conquered. Thousands of youth are defecting from the battle lines each year. How many casualties have fallen? This war correspondent has seen too many with his own eyes to count, but one report has it that over one-half of the youth leave the church never to return before their 17th birthday. This tide must be stemmed. How smug will we remain in our resistance to understand something so simple as youthful attraction to a good beat in the music? Latter-day Saints, you cannot go on hiding. Your children are dying. And to my children, here is the grand key to the music mystery. You must first learn to use the promptings of the Holy Ghost, so that you may divide the music you hear into 4 groups. Do not try to do this on your own, but only with the help of the Holy Ghost. Here are the 4 groups. 1. Good people making good music. 2. Good people making wicked music. 3. Wicked people making good music. And 4. Wicked people making wicked music. When good people make good music, the soul feels warm and good. When good people make wicked music, all that partake will be lost. When wicked people make good music, the music does no harm unless you learn to adore the wicked people and their ways. Instead, make them adore you and your ways. But when wicked people make wicked music, they are already devils, and some of them have the powers that Satan promises to his followers. Do not go near them, because they only want to destroy you, and Satan has promised them great rewards if they succeed. The problem that we have in this church is that many good people who have not learned to use the promptings of the Holy Ghost have judged a lot of music from Group 1 to be in Group 4. But worse yet, we have a lot of youth who have judged the music in Group 4 to be in Group 1. The problem that we have in this church, then, is that too many good people have not learned to use the promptings of the Holy Ghost. So, my children, now you know what it is that you must do first. Chapter 7. June 1962, after many record hops and hours of starvation wages, I raised enough money to romp off to the FCC licensed school. I would stay at the home of the parents of Dean Marriott, who was my roommate at BYU. I would attend Grantham Electronics School in Hollywood for just 6 weeks of the summer. I had saved enough to pay cash for a nice little '51 Chevy. When the transmission fell off on the day that I bought it, I left the car in Springville with a friend named Jamie. I told my friend to fix the car and sell it. I'd need the money to get through the FCC license school. I was in such a hurry to get to that school that I unwisely borrowed money to buy a '55 Chevy. What did I care? I'd be in the chips soon. I'd have my FCC license at last in August. The license school, however, wanted $500 when I got there. I told them of my car problems. I sounded so desperate, I suppose, that I became the first student in the history of their school to be admitted without first paying all of their fee. At the end of the 6 weeks of classes that lasted 14 hours per day, 7 days per week, my mind was so full of electronic mumbo-jumbo that I could hardly stay awake. The last day before the big exam finally arrived, the anxiety was overpowering. I said a prayer, sat down to study, and promptly fell asleep for the next 37 consecutive hours. That's right, I slept for a day and a half without a twitch. I woke with barely enough time to drive into L.A. to take the test. After all of this, the year or so of knocking around, trying to put together enough money, and then just barely making it through this ordeal money-wise, energy-wise, and sanity-wise, I flunked by just one solitary point. What a disaster. I would have to wait 90 days to retake the exam. This would mean no job until October. I was already in arrears to the school, my car payments, and most of all, my stomach. The Marriotts had requested that I not stay any longer at their home. A new baby had just arrived in their crowded home, and of course I wouldn't ask to stay any longer. They had been altruistic long enough. I actually drove into Hollywood and parked where I ran out of gas. I slept in the car for 1 whole week. I lived on 1 jar of honey, a loaf of bread, and 1 quart of chocolate milk. Hollywood, the land of chocolate milk and honey. I shall never forget you. I heard that the former head resident director at Helaman Halls at BYU had taken a similar position at UCLA. My contact with him brought me my choice of 600 rooms at UCLA's Dykstra Hall until the UCLA football team would come to roost in late August. To me, this was an out-and-out miracle. This also led to me being discovered as a DJ who could play his little satchel full of records at various rock dances at UCLA. I earned enough to stay alive. On the night that I would have to leave my room, the head resident came in and asked where I was going to go. I told him I have just been asking the Lord that same question. He asked me what the Lord had said. I responded that I felt that I shouldn't worry. The Lord had helped me so far. I was sure I would find something. How right you are, my friend. I was just testing your faith before I gave you what you need. Here is the phone number of a lady who needs some non-drinking, non-smoking student to watch over her house on the beach at Malibu while she goes to Europe for a short visit. Do you think you can fit it in your schedule? Just another long string of miracles about to happen that would set the course of my life forever. Sitting on the beach for days, pitching rocks into the waves, I began to ask God why I had been robbed of my ability to serve him in the music business. Were my goals too far-fetched? Was I unworthy? Did the Lord really need me in the music business? Was that portion of my patriarchal blessing stricken from the tape because God would ultimately deny me the mission he had once promised? Were the brethren in the general authority positions of this church really against those, quote, drum-beating youth campaigns, as I had heard? But how could that be? Doesn't the Lord run this church by inspiring the brethren? How could they run the church by inspiration from the Lord and then have their inspiration run counter to things that I knew the Lord wanted me to do? How could the phone call to Bobby Inkman have been a coincidence? Does the devil have power to construct such a sequence of events accompanied by such a sweet and powerful spirit, identical in every way to what one would only expect from the God of heaven and earth? How could I not be confused if, in fact, the very men I considered to be at the head of this church by direct appointment from God were directly appointed by God to be against the things that I was directly commanded to do, by every stroke of inspiration that I had ever been given? Or were the brethren actually against those, quote, drum-beating youth campaigns, as that mission president had said before he was removed from office? I have no idea why he was removed from his position. His time was probably just finished. But it was definitely something to think about. The timing was so incredible. First he was there standing in the way, then he was gone. I begged and I pleaded for more light and knowledge. Then came a most startling impression. Wouldn't President Don C. Wood, who is also a mission president, know the answer to all of those questions? If the Lord has ever spoken to me, it was during this exchange of questions and answers. And the events of the next 3 days will bear out that surely, for this brief period of my life, I was in contact with some great being who was in control of events that I am about to tell you that happened in 4 states. The impression that I felt following my question was so strong that I answered out loud, speaking directly to the Lord. But Lord, President Wood is in Portland, Oregon. I am stuck here, penniless, in California. How can I go to Portland? I felt another powerful impression. It told me to just drive there, no stopping, no worrying about how, just go. But the brakes on my 55 Chev had just completely failed. Plus, I had just received a telegram from the finance company in Utah that they were going to charge me with interstate flight to avoid paying for my car if I didn't return to Utah with the car immediately. If convicted, I understand that there is a possible prison sentence connected with such a crime. I didn't want to mess with that, but what was I to do? In failing that exam, all of my plans had run amok. Now, how was I to, 1, fix the brakes with no money, or 2, make a trip to Utah to avoid a court battle over a car I could neither pay for nor afford to return, or 3, if I did make it back to Utah, how would I ever in the world find Jamie and retrieve my old 51 Chev and get it fixed, and 4, above all, how would I get enough gas money to drive from Utah to Portland after answering these other 3 problems successfully? As much as I wanted to talk to President Wood, and as strong as I feel my faith was at that time, I just could not for 1 minute believe that God would ever answer my prayers to bring me to this man who could set me straight about all of the myriad questions that I needed to have answered. I would need 4 absolute miracles. I was thus engaged in prayer, feverishly, pleadingly. The lady was about to return to her home. I thought, since she will be arriving back at any minute, and I have to go somewhere, it might as well be to Portland, Oregon. Then the phone rang. It was my old friend Keith Colley. I had started him on what eventually became a very successful songwriting career when we were friends back in Washington State. He was just sitting around his apartment in Hollywood and wondering about my whereabouts. I did not know that he had moved to Hollywood, and so this was a very pleasant surprise. He had called my mother in Washington to find me. When I asked why, he said that he just had a sudden flash to call me. He asked if we could get together. Using all that was left of my failing brake system, I crept along Santa Monica Boulevard from Malibu to Hollywood using just the emergency brake. Our conversation covered everything in this book from page 1 forward. I wanted so badly to convert Keith to this gospel. He is the very model of what this church needs in the music business. He has now become a very prosperous songwriter, but alas, not a victor in the testimony war. Near the end of our conversation, I told him why I needed to see President Wood. If he could have helped, he would have. But at that moment we were both destitute. Miracle number 1 came charging in the door like a raging bull. Keith's roommate, Jim Ford, huffed into the room demanding relief from his big problem, to wit, "Keith, what am I going to do? I have to sing tonight at a banquet for the governor of California. All of these friends of my agent who want to back me for a record are going to be at that banquet. I've just found out that I can't even get into the banquet unless I am wearing a black suit. I couldn't get any credit today, and I only have $30 cash to my name. Now where can anybody buy a black suit for $30? I'm ruined. If I blow this one, I'll die." "Jim," I said, "maybe I can help. Last week I gave a friend of mine a ride to Pomona. As he got out of the car, he threw some of his clothes back into the back seat of my car. He said that his mother had bought him a black suit that he didn't like at all. It's still out in the car. I think it is black, and it's brand new." Faster than you can say Shazam, Jim was out in the back seat of my car and back up the steps, half naked, and half into this black suit. It was an absolute perfect fit and looked like $1,000,000. Jim wanted to know how much I needed for the suit. I told him that I got it for free and that I needed more money than he had to solve my problem, so he could have it for free. I told Jim about my need to go to Utah and Oregon and what a jam I was in because of the broken brakes on my car. First he rained the $30 down on my head, saying, "Here's the gas money to Utah." Then he got on the phone. "Ray, this is your nephew Jim. Look, I've got a friend who needs a brake job in the worst way. Tomorrow at 8 a.m.? Great. What else do you need, Lenny, old boy?" Uncle Ray had just survived an auto accident that claimed some fingers on his hand. He felt so lucky to be alive that he frequently offered the services of his nationwide safety brake center to deserving friends for free, so they might not have to endure what had happened to him because of someone else's poor brakes. How's that for irony? Just 24 hours had passed since my prayer. 2 miracles had already happened. I was back in Malibu packing for the trip to Utah. The lady had called and had dismissed me from the duty of watching her house. She was on her way home. Everything was in order except one thing, and that was, where would I sleep in Utah as I repaired the '51 Chevy and made ready my escape to Portland. Again the phone rang at the very instant of need. It was my friend Dick Truex. How strange that he should call from Provo. You see, he was the only friend that I had while at BYU that was a Provo resident. I did not have his new unlisted phone number or address. This was beginning to get interesting, and I marveled more than ever about how I must surely be on my way to President Wood. I wondered what dire thing he had to tell me. From the time I felt impressed to go to see President Wood until the time I was on my way and actually in Utah was approximately 36 hours. It was after midnight when I arrived in Provo. Dick and I sadly parked the '55 Chevy in front of the finance company office. The next morning I rode with Dick out to see Jamie. Luckily, Jamie had just finished repairing my '51 Chevy with the money that I left him for the job, and the car even had a fourth of a tank of gas, about 75 cents worth in those days. After resting up at Dick's house and telling him what had just transpired, he agreed with me that I could probably drive all the way to Portland on 75 cents worth of gas. So I started up the car and waved goodbye. Dick leaned over the car and pounded on the top and said, "Get going, you'll make it." Traveling up State Street in Orem, I came to what is now a salmon store. It was a Safeway store back then. Exiting at that moment was a friend named Dick Miller that I had stayed with in Fullerton, California. It was late August 1962, and he had come back to BYU for the fall semester. He moaned that his poor old car would never make it through the school year. I pointed out that my poor old car was not as poor old as his was poor old, and that it might be wisdom for us to swap cars right there in the parking lot. We mutually decided that my wreck was worth $50 more than his wreck, and he had the cash, and that deal swung so fast we set a world record for the quickest car swap in history. As I drove out of the parking lot, now on my way to Portland in his old '47 Plymouth, he shouted the following encouragement. "Oh, by the way, Lynn, it overheats. The temperature gauge doesn't work at all, and when it kills from overheating, just fill her up with water, and she'll start when she gets cool." I sped away with his lips still moving in the rear-view mirror. I had to get to President Wood. I figured that whatever the Lord wanted me to hear from him must be second in importance to the coming of the millennium. By the next morning of the third day of this odyssey, I awoke in Idaho. As the car began to sputter and die, just like Miller said that it surely would, I coasted into a Texaco station at a bend in the road just past Boise near Caldwell, Idaho. I opened her up for water. The first sound I heard was this funny pling. The next sound I heard more closely resembled the flush of a toilet than the sound of a car filling up with water. It was the sound of 147 Plymouth being flushed down the drain, all right. As any mechanic in the crowd can tell you, I had just cracked the engine block. It would take more than $500 to make that car worth $25 again. I stepped to a payphone. I found the local bishop in the yellow pages. "Bishop Norman, I've got a problem." "Sorry, Lynn, I haven't got any way to tow your car here for storage. All I have is a VW Bug." At that moment, a bunch of friends from BYU drove up for gas. They were on their way back to Provo from the Seattle World's Fair. They had a tow rope, a station wagon, and 4 or 5 big guys. Shortly thereafter, we followed the bishop to his home. He invited me in for dinner. I think he sensed that I had a story to tell. Then, as I was engaged in telling the story over dinner, I said, "I don't suppose that anyone would ever believe me, but now that I have told you why I must go to see President Wood, why do you suppose the Lord would bring me just this far and then abort the whole trip?" His sweet wife began to cry. He said, "We not only believe you, I think we can tell you why your trip has ended here in Caldwell." I don't think I was ready for the final miracle of this story. Had I gone to Portland, I would have missed President Wood. He was not there. He was instead on his way to Salt Lake City, where I had just been. He would be there for an entire month. But the real kicker was that he was in Caldwell in Boise, Idaho, this very night. He was holding a zone conference not 5 miles from where I was sitting. No one finished their dinner. We just sat there and wept like babies. Later on, President Wood made time for me. A mission president spends probably most of his time just counseling young men and women. To him, it may have been just another counseling session, but to me, it was like sitting in the front porch swing with God. To answer one of my great burning questions, he said that a great number of saints had been added to the rolls of the church by these so-called drum-beating youth campaigns. He said that when ideas are ahead of their times, they always meet great opposition. He pointed out that some people go through all of their lives with this problem, that their ideas are always ahead of their times. He said, "You will probably have many other ideas like that Moses Lake Youth Conference, but such ideas will get you into trouble in this church, not because the church isn't true, but because the church is true." He warned that I would not be thought of highly by some with great authority. You will have the peculiar honor of having men love the results of what you do after you have done it, but they will oppose you as you propose to do it. This utterly mystified me at the time, but I have lived to see every word of this prophecy fulfilled, and prophecy was what it was. This was a dazzling display of the Lord's ability to speak through one specially endowed priesthood holder for the benefit of another person. This man was not in any position of ecclesiastical authority over me, but his keen understanding of my singular plight was rare indeed. No one who was in authority over me, neither bishop nor stake president nor anyone else, could have fielded any of my questions with insight such as this man had. The reason, in part at least, had to be his experience first-hand with the type of proselyting that I wanted to spend my life doing. So what other man on earth could God have selected to give this vibrant prophecy unto me? And how else was I to receive these things after what had just whisked me across several states to be by his side? As you can imagine, I sat speechless, and the wisdom continued to pour forth. Your greatest opposition will always come from those who are numbered among the saints, and don't expect them to oppose you like saints. Some will oppose you like they opposed Joseph Smith. They will lie, cheat, steal, blackmail, and justify it all because to them you are hurting the church. They will see themselves as if they are on the side of God against you, who they will suppose is on the side of the devil. Members will be jealous of you when you succeed. They will laugh at you when you fail. When you strike out on your own to create some LDS rock stars and to make your own LDS-type movies, they will question your authority and your motives, and they will act as if they are ignorant of the Scripture that says that it is a wicked and a slothful servant who waits to be commanded in all things, when they see that you do not wait to be commanded to do those things. He then gave this profound advice. If you are serious about doing these things, then you should just gird up your loins and go and do them. Do not worry what people may think of you. Go back to Los Angeles, the money capital of the world. There you can learn what you must do, and you'll need great wealth to do it. There are members there, and all over the church, who already have the wealth. If you gain the abilities that you will need, they can help you. If they do not help you, then you may gain enough ability and wealth so that you can do it on your own, and I pray that God will bless you to this end. Can you even guess what this experience has meant to me through the years as those persons who were prophesied one by one came into my life, who would have torn my testimony asunder? President Wood was the first to warn me about the proclivity principle. As I have told you in the preface, this is the reason men stone prophets, war against all manner of good projects, and bring shame to the name of Christianity. In this experience I had an absolute foreknowledge of how the pieces would eventually fit together. So each time the tempests began to blow, I would recall to my heart the loving manner in which our Father hears our prayers, and I would call again for deliverance, and deliverance would come. To my children, as you read this, can you not see how my life is laid before you as an open book? Did we not knock many times, and was it not always open to us? And isn't this the gift that was promised to us by our Father? Chapter 8. November 1962, a great milestone of my early career, was passed this month when I at last took again the FCC exam and passed with flying colors. Now I was ready to work as a DJ in some modern-day Camelot where I would be King Arthur, the devil in the music business would be the dragon, and my round table would be full of Pat Boone types that I would create from the struggling young LDS musicians and actors that I would surely meet. I began to believe that revelation was as available from God as was the rain. I already had many experiences that led me to believe this way. Take, for example, the experience I had while attending a Sunday school class in Hollywood that month. The teacher was telling the class that married couples needed to have a good fight every little once in a while to blow off steam, and thereby avoid major eruptions that could lead to divorce. I felt that smacked a little of the devil, and I said so in the class. The whole place erupted in a cacophony of guffaws that really embarrassed me. I went home so disturbed by what had happened in the class that I decided to pray and ask God why this bothered me so. Finishing my prayer, I glanced down at a newspaper on the floor. It was the Church News, and an editorial on the back page was topped by the headline, "Blowing Off Steam?" The article began, "It is being taught by many sociologists of our day, and unfortunately in some of our own church meetings, that there is something to be gained by married couples blasting away at each other in occasional fights. The argument here is that it is better to let off a little steam at each other once in a while than to let things eventually blow up in a marriage-ending war. This is simply not doctrine from the Lord and may actually create more harsh feelings as it lends to an atmosphere of perpetual conflict. Latter-day Saints should recognize the source of this doctrine as we ask ourselves the question, since when is a little sin beneficial to character?" David O. McKay. The next Sunday, you-know-who read you-know-what to you-know-who, and we all know there is nothing quite out of character for a Christian, and yet so fun, as the last cacophonous guffaw. Yes, I had the last laugh on that teacher in that class, but I tell this story more to illustrate the degree of revelation that is available to us at every turn of the road. Think what it means if you can have revelation in this manner to settle a dispute in an ordinary Sunday school class, then what must be available in the really big moments of life. If you call such experiences coincidences, then you will not understand very much of this book. You see, winning the testimony war depends a great deal on being able to tell a coincidence from a sacred experience. In December 1962, at the invitation of Vic and Romay Howling, I went to Bakersfield, California, to speak at all of the seminary classes there. Oddly enough, this led to a radio DJ job at KWAC, my first big break into the glorious big time of Southern California radio. But would you believe it? This one station did not require the FCC license that I had worked so hard to obtain. Does this need any comment? In Bakersfield, I became the loneliest that I had ever been. Up until now, my concentration had been centered upon obtaining that elusive FCC license. Now I had the job I wanted. I knew I was now on my way up the ladder of success, and I wanted someone to share my rise to fame and glory with me. I was instead constantly overwhelmed by the feelings of worthlessness that often accompany single working fellows and girls. Sister Burkhead's prophetic dream was on my mind a lot, and I followed her warning voice. Just knowing how accurate her dream had become gave me a powerful testimony that I was on the trail of bigger things up ahead. The second part of her dream was that if I could get by all of these feelings of loneliness, that God had prepared a mission for me to accomplish. All I had to do was stay pure. I had succeeded so far. Even though the loneliness was indeed a powerful tool on the side of Satan, I still had great confidence in my ability to survive and win. I met many people during this period who later became stars. This served as a great encouragement to me. My ordinary acquaintances in the music biz became Bob Todd, vice president of Cream Records, and Glenn Campbell, singing star. As I have said, my main goal was to emerge as an important disc jockey with sufficient acclaim to capture the attention of some record company who would then give me an opportunity to release a few of my own songs. This goal was met and even surpassed very quickly. Fred Astaire had a record label called Ava Records. Tony Butala, my good Catholic friend from the Letterman, along with Bob Todd, had a record label called Goliath. Generally, what these smaller labels try to do is to get action on a limited release of a song and then sell the master to a major label. This was perfect for me. With these friends, I learned the first facts that I needed to begin to develop toward eventually owning my own recording studio. After 1 year had passed, KWAC, Quacker Jack Radio, went out of business. Every DJ acquires those inevitable ratings that either skyrocket or demolish his career. Although KWAC, Quack, was being soundly defeated in the local ratings battles, it was my good fortune to show stronger ratings than our competition, KAFY, Caffey. A number of promotional stunts, wherein I set the world's record for broadcasting from the bottom of a swimming pool for 5 hours in a diving suit and helmet, and the world's record for disc jockeying while continuously roller skating in circles for 14 hours, and various other inane things, won for me the coveted Outstanding Bakersfield DJ selection from 2 of the local high schools. This recognition led to an offer from the sister station of our competition, Caffey, and I was soon happy to go to work for the mighty Tiger Radio KFXM in San Bernardino. The competition of KFXM was the even mightier KMEN. One day at work on KFXM, I received the biggest lift my ego had ever had when I was called by KMEN and told that for a few extra dollars I could come to work at KMEN any time, and I went as soon as I could. This was the big-time radio breakthrough that I prayed would come. This was the 29th largest radio market in the United States. Making it here would give me the assurance that I would have a long career in the radio business. Very soon the big record companies were sending out representatives to ask for favors. Payola is the term used to describe the favors that DJs receive from the record companies in return for leaning on their latest releases. It is a criminal offense to participate in payola schemes. Thus, MGM had a man whose job it was to become my friend. They, like I, wanted to avoid any illegal acts, for everyone knew that this station was being watched closely by those people whose job it was to probe into all the nasty dealings of this dirty business. Many DJs are also songwriters. It is not illegal to ask a record company to listen to your songs and record the ones they like. That is what record companies and songwriters do for each other. Through this intrigue, I soon obtained a release on a tune called Big Mean Dragon Machine. This was during the Hot Rod record craze. I was the singer, and the record became Pick of the Week on the Gene Weed Show, the Weedy Weekly Wailer on KFWB, the nation's undisputed king of the rockers in Los Angeles. And as an item of interest, that same week, a station KNEZ listed my record as their Pick of the Week and listed as their runner-up a record by a new group from England, I Want to Hold Your Hand by the Beatles. Yes, folks, for that one brief week, as far as those 2 stations were concerned, I was ahead of the Beatles in the red-hot newcomer category. How many times do you suppose I have wished things would have stayed that way? Sigh. I began to speak at an ever-increasing number of firesides. Once I was asked to travel 90 miles away to speak at the LDS Institute of Religion at San Diego State College. While waiting outside prior to this speaking engagement, a familiar-looking girl walked by, so I said, "Hi, what are you doing here tonight?" She turned out to be not so familiar. She said, "I've come here to this fireside tonight. They are having some rock and roll disc jockey bear his testimony here tonight. How sacrilegious can they get?" Then she inquired, "What brings you here?" I said, "Oh, I work at a radio station about 90 miles from here, and I have just driven all the way down here to bear my testimony tonight." Purple. Maybe mixed with a little green, but mostly purple. Then, for the moment, we laughed together after her cheeks stopped flushing through every color of the rainbow. My job at Cayman had already begun to fulfill its expected purpose. I had firmly established contacts with several major studios and record labels. My friend at MGM left MGM to form his own independent label, Ultima Records. This simple event in the life of one Larry Goldberg started an avalanche of changes that are without boundary. Larry was able to give to me an incredible opportunity to search out young talent and bring them into the studio. In this capacity, I met two young men who were very receptive to hearing about the LDS Church and who would have probably joined at that time were it not for the objections of their parents. We three banged away at making records for Larry and a partner. Eventually, Larry became vice president of Hanna-Barbera Records. After this start with Larry, my two friends went on to become stars. Jimmy Messina grew up to become Buffalo Springfield and later got into Loggins and Messina with several gold records. Our lanky piano player had a Baptist preacher father who wanted his son to become a preacher. The father asked me one day if I thought his son should even try the fickle recording business. I said, "Mr. Webb, your son Jimmy is the best songwriter I have ever heard," and I talked him into letting Jimmy Webb try it for a while. Glenn Campbell owes me one. If it had not been for Jimmy Webb, Glenn Campbell might still be a studio guitar picker looking for his first hit song. Jimmy gave to him, By the Time I Get to Phoenix, Wichita Lineman, Where's the Playground, Susie, and to others he gave Up, Up, and Away, MacArthur Park, and so many more of your favorite songs of the last decade or so that I have lost track. The last that I heard, Jimmy's mother had died. His father left preaching to become a producer at MGM. I saw Robert Webb, the father, at MGM one day, and I asked how Jimmy was getting along with all of his newfound fame. Robert said that the reason why he left preaching was to come and be by Jimmy's side. He is about to jump off of one of these big, tall buildings. He is now hooked on drugs. He can't get any peace. If he goes away to Las Vegas for the weekend, somebody like Frank Sinatra will come busting into Jimmy's room at 2 a.m. just to wake up Jimmy to get him to write a hit song for him. The lesson I learned from these two Jimmys was scary. Messina is doing a little bit better, but when I think of how they both remarked that the church was very appealing to them, and what a difference it would have made if they would have gone on and accepted it, I realized that I must never fail again like I had failed with them. They both have had the opportunity to serve God to a fantastic degree, being seen and listened to by millions. I wonder if they are even aware of God and what they could be doing for Him. I hope they are still the great people I once knew. One thing is certain, they sure make good music. In November 1963, I went to the Los Angeles Temple. In taking the endowments in the temple, a Latter-day Saint makes a covenant with God that he will obey certain laws, and God covenants to offer certain blessings for this obedience. One of the sacred laws is that you will wear a certain kind of garment at all times. One of the blessings is that you will be protected by this garment as if it were a shield until your mission on earth is finished. As I found myself amidst the fulfillment of some of my lifelong dreams for a mission, and I also found myself in a much more socially mind-bending climate, I wanted this protection. As we all were putting on basketball uniforms at a donkey basketball game for charity, the K-Man DJs saw this garment on me. From that day forward, they began to ridicule me for wearing this garment even on the air. This was an intolerable situation. I called the manager into a discussion of the problem only to have my job terminated. It was a choice between, quote, Bryson and more established personnel. I did not find out for several years that each time I would apply for a new job, I would proudly put down as a former employer K-Man, only to have my prospective employer call K-Man and be told that I was released because I was, quote, a religious fanatic. One day, many years later, I found this out as I reapplied at K-Man. The manager confessed that he had never really understood my side of the story. When he did understand, he apologized greatly for the wrong that he had been doing against me. He said, I must have cost you at least 10 really good jobs. All of those guys that were part of that problem each went away from here, leaving us with even greater problems that they had caused. How I wish I could go back and change the way that we handled your situation. At last I knew why I had gone so far in the radio business. only to have my career suddenly bump into 2 stormy years where I couldn't seem to get a job anywhere. I could find a lot of jobs, but I never could seem to land one. Here was a real chance to get bitter toward my religion. The garments that I had sought for protection had been the cause of me getting uprooted from my very successful career. But the Scriptures teach that if we are righteous, the Lord will consecrate all of our afflictions for gain. Here is how the Lord did that in this situation. Because I could not get a job due to the ill reference I was unwittingly using, I became very broke. I was asked by Larry Goldberg if I wouldn't write and produce with him several cartoon record albums for Hanna-Barbera. In order to live near Larry and be available for this project, I was gently persuaded by Larry to sleep on his front room couch for nearly 2 years. I would have never thought to mooch off of someone for that long, but it was Larry's idea, and his wife and 3 little children became my good friends. At Hanna-Barbera, Larry hired Danny Hutton and me for this purpose to create a pile of children's records. I wrote 61 songs for the team to record. Danny, Roger Dalton, and I recorded them all, singing children's songs until we were blue in the face. Danny Hutton went on to become the leader of a group called Three Dog Night, blasting out several million sellers, and I had a few of my own. These children's records amassed over $13 million in sales. I absolutely marveled at how my plan had worked. President Wood had given me such great advice. The prophecies about my life had thus been fulfilled. I was told by Don Bohannon, president of Hanna-Barbera Records, that I would be getting a royalty check in excess of $1 million for my 2 years of participation in this very successful project. Yes, I certainly marveled at how my afflictions could be turned to such gain. If I had never lost that job at K-Man, I might still be looking for the connection with a big record company that would record my songs. But because I lost that job at K-Man, and because I had lost it in such a weird way that it caused me to get really destitute looking for another job, I had done something I probably never would have done, sleep on Larry's couch for 2 years, and this had resulted in the assurance now that all of my dreams would be fulfilled. This is how I thought my afflictions had been turned into gain. But my afflictions were just beginning. I made a serious blunder at this point of my life. I thought that all I had to do now was to sit back and wait for the Hanna-Barbera royalty check. But by July 1966, I was to be wrapped up in a huge lawsuit. Hanna-Barbera was claiming that I was due nothing for these songs that had earned them millions of dollars. Larry Goldberg had arranged for 2 attorneys named Boxer and Stoll in Beverly Hills. They were so certain that I would win punitive damages for fraud on the part of Hanna-Barbera that they agreed to handle the case for only a share of the winnings, which would probably total several millions, counting treble damages for fraud. Evidently, when fraud is determined, writers get 3 times their normal royalties. So the blunder I had made earlier became an even bigger blunder, as I now decided that I could just sit back and wait for my money. I had no idea how corrupt our judicial system is, but I was about to find out firsthand. I had sacrificed such a huge chunk of my life for this project for Hanna-Barbera, I felt that I deserved millions. After K-Man in 1964, I slept on Larry's couch while getting the project rolling. Then I moved to a job at KLAV in Las Vegas, which I eventually left to come back and complete some more on the project with Larry. Then I took another job at KSNN in Pocatello, Idaho, which I left to come back and help Larry. This project was so important that I got so tired of quitting good jobs to help complete this project that I finally gave up looking for any more jobs and just retired to the good old couch at Larry's house. It was the kind of project that you could only complete in spurts. You could work a while, then rest for several weeks, and then work a while, and so on. Toward the end of the 2 years, I finally found something better than Larry's couch to sleep on. The Osmond brothers and the Klinger sisters were both popular LDS singing groups, and when these 2 families went on tour around the world to state fairs, etc., performing, I was lucky enough to live in their houses and keep the houses safe from harm in exchange for free rent. Perhaps the most important thing to point out about working on a project like writing songs for the Hanna-Barbera children's record series is that you don't get paid while you are doing it. Unless you can sleep on somebody's couch, there is no way to do a project like this. You do it because there is a huge royalty at the end of the rainbow. I knew this project would be a blockbuster because there would be no way in the world that Hanna-Barbera, the cartoon giant, could fail at selling millions of cartoon records. So who wouldn't sleep on Larry's couch for 2 years to get involved in a deal like this? So can you see how utterly destroyed I was that they had refused to pay me after they had picked my pockets clean for 2 years? In studying the Scriptures, I have often pondered the meaning of the various verses wherein the Lord urges us to give away our cloak also whenever someone sues us for our coat. And there is also this advice given, that we should agree with our adversary quickly while we are in the way with him, lest we be taken into court and brought to trial and put in chains. I have always held tightly to the belief that the Lord is trying to tell us that he has the power to make things right, and that we don't need to rely on the courts to make things right. I have always held tightly to the belief that the real saint is one who can give in to his greedy adversary and rely upon the Lord to make restitution. Section 122 of the Doctrine and Covenants, thought by many to be the most powerful words ever written on the subject of persecution, tells us that the bounds of our enemies are set, and they cannot pass. This section also tells us that when we have descended through all manner of prisons and perils, that the Son of Man hath descended below them all. Art thou greater than he? I choke up a little bit every time I read that. In other words, if we take things to court, we may win or we may lose. Most people think that being right in court means that you will probably win in court. It never occurs to some that taking things to court is often just expensive, and it is very frustrating to lose when you are right, because then you have to stand by and watch as the powers of the police and the authorities are transferred to your adversary, and he will use them to get even further gain from you. But, and this may be the most meaningful thing in this entire book, if we resist the temptation to take things to court, then the God over us all is bound to take notice, and he can really make things right. Not only does he sometimes make financial restitution, but he can actually take away the grief. He is the only one that can help you to get rid of the bitterness and anger that really hurts more than the loss of the money. When you are angry for long periods of time, you can actually lose your health. Then the devil wins a twofold victory. God has promised that he will only let our enemies advance just so far, and then he will stop them. He said, "Thy days are known, and thy years shall not be numbered less. Therefore fear not what man can do, for God shall be with you forever and ever." Because I did not know any better, I disregarded these references in Doctrine and Covenants section 122. I sued Hanna-Barbera, hoping that the courts of the land would make restitution when God had already said that I could count on him instead. It is my prayer that if you obtain no other thing from the reading of this book, that you will obtain a knowledge as to what the Lord intends that we should do whenever we are faced with a potential lawsuit against any of our brothers. I view this conflagration from Hanna-Barbera as a direct attempt from Satan to block my life's mission, and feeling justified in the Lord, I sued Hanna-Barbera. I fell heir to a jillion years of history wherein the carnal man decides that he knows more than God. I employed the proclivity principle against my brother, and I sued him in the name of the Lord. In effect, I had rewritten a portion of the Scriptures to make the word say instead, whenever a man sues you for your coat, then sue him back if you don't want to lose your coat. And that is not the way that verse should be translated, as we shall soon see. And to my children, whatever you do, don't stop reading here. Chapter 9. Conspiracy is a word with an unusual place in our language. The word exists to describe something that nobody ever wants to admit may exist. The dictionary defines conspiracy as a planning and acting together secretly, especially for an unlawful or a harmful purpose, such as murder or treason. By the title of this book, you are supposed to guess that this book is going to tell you something about winning the testimony war. That is, you are going to read about how you are going to maintain a strong testimony about God, in spite of some threatening forces that will war against your belief in God. This now brings us to a discussion of the possibility that conspiracies of a very satanic nature can and will exist among the ranks of those forces warring against your testimony. But in discussing conspiracy, let me warn you, it is something inherent in the human mind to dismiss any notion that conspiracies actually exist. Therefore, you will probably find what I am about to tell you to be quite unbelievable. The warning is this: conspiracies do exist. It is this very unbelievableness that gives them their greatest strength. Some conspiracies exist for centuries because no one will believe in them and try to stamp them out. Take heed. The conspiracy I am going to tell you about is very real indeed. In 1964 I met a young girl, but I won't say where, to preserve her anonymity, and therefore her safety. She was the homecoming queen of her high school. Her father was in a bishopric. It seems that she was awarded a scholarship to a private school in Salt Lake City. While in Salt Lake City, she would spend many spare evenings at the Terrace Ballroom. She was approached there by a young man who told her that he would like to take her to a meeting where her eyes would be opened to wonders beyond her power to comprehend. Unfortunately, she went. Soon she was aghast at the horror before her. This friend had taken her to a meeting of a secret society. This group was contrived to destroy the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Up front, the rostrum held a man who was congratulating those in attendance for having risen to positions of importance within the LDS Church. She told me of this meeting some 6 months later. What she had to go through to be able to share this story with me was truly unbelievable, just like all things about all conspiracies. These people in this meeting were members of the Church of the Firstborn. This is a sect made up entirely of persons who have construed their commitment to Christianity to be the working of the destruction of the whole LDS religion. She commented that when you see them passing out pamphlets at our church parking lots, you only see the tip of the iceberg. There is a whole glacier underneath the surface that no one is aware of, and they are everywhere in this church. When I asked why she was allowed into their secret meeting, she told me that they took me over to someone's house. They got down on their knees and prayed to someone very strange to me. It must have been the devil. A wind came into the room and rushed about. I was terrified. Then they told me that if I revealed any of the things that I had seen, that something very bad would happen to me. I was told that I must join their cult, or one night, as I slept, a deep gash would be put upon my face if they thought that I had told anyone about these things. I asked how it was that she was telling me these things. How did she get away? She said that for 2 months she couldn't sleep for more than 5 minutes at a time. She was very near to a state of collapse. She did not know how much time she had to make up her mind about joining their cult. She knew she was probably being watched constantly. So in the middle of one night she crept from her apartment, ran to her car, and sped away to her father at better than 100 miles per hour all the way. She collapsed into her loving parents' arms, and then her father took her back to Salt Lake City. He wanted Joseph Fielding Smith to hear her story. Later she received a priesthood blessing. In this blessing it was made known to her why she had this strange encounter. The Lord had allowed her to endure this horror for the benefit of certain saints that needed to know about the existence of this conspiracy. She was told that the Lord was working to uproot this cult. She was told in her blessing that she would be shown certain people who would need to know about this cult. She said that these people felt they had a work to perform to cancel the good effects of anyone who worked with LDS youth. To accomplish this major goal of theirs, they would spread rumors about such saints, believing that the rumors would feed off of a latent proneness to gossip in the Mormon Church, and thus propel these good people to the ground. As she spoke, I thought how many silly rumors I had heard about different authors, church leaders, and good grief, myself. I had always dismissed these terrible rumors about myself and others as just an example of how loose some people are with their tongues, but could this awful nightmare be true? To think that there are people standing around in this church just waiting to start bad rumors? Now that is hard to believe until you think about the number of rumors that you have heard that are just not true. She bore solemn testimony that this is all very true, and the same Spirit that bears witness to the truth of all that I know to be true bore testimony to me that this awful thing is certainly true, and is to be understood and prepared for and fought against. There can be no question that there are forces at work against all of the faithful members of God's only true church. There are also forces at work against every good man and woman on earth, many who are not members of this church. There are people who call themselves high priests in the first satanic church of America, and there are people who are members of the Church of the Lamb of God, located largely in Salt Lake City, who follow the murdering LeBarons. As I ponder the events of my life, I am sure that this church needs to be warned. Many friends have asked me to leave this part of the manuscript out of this book, stating that they are not ready to hear that some of their friendly Mormon neighbors may be working to destroy the church, and that instead of doing good, this chapter might only do harm. And I have to wonder about such advice and ask such people to read again the preface of this book. Should a war correspondent correspond about the war, or should he fear that he might be flogged? The general needs more saints to come to the front. If the saints are not ready, tomorrow may be too late. To not include this chapter would be like trying to be a war correspondent and neglecting to tell the folks back home that they were about to be attacked on their own shores. And to those of you who have been asked to join a conspiracy such as the ones described in this chapter, and to the ones who have been attacked by rumors and all such character assassination plots, I hope you gain much courage from reading this book, for I have tried to write much in this book for you to help you win the testimony war. Chapter 10. By the spring of 1966, 6 short years after I had joined the church, the testimony war was in full battle array for me. All of the things that Sister Burkhead had been shown in her prophetic dream were nipping at my heels like a vicious pack of wolves. A constant, critical attitude prevailed all around me. Many fellow saints felt that I was wasting my life striving for a dream that could never be. I just didn't fit the mold of what a young LDS man was supposed to be. When people would ask what it was that I was doing with myself, I would try to explain that I was waiting for my royalties from Hanna-Barbera, and that with these royalties I was going to build a recording studio. People did not understand why I would want to do this with all of that money. They thought I would be wiser going into real estate. And when I would explain my dream of building the church with an influx of LDS recording stars, they would explain to me the meaning of pie in the sky. My friends did not understand the background of this situation. I felt that the experience with President Wood was just like getting a direct revelation from God to continue pursuing this goal of mine. Else, why did God go through such a phenomenal display of carefully arranged coincidences to convince me of my direction and pathway? Sticking to this pathway, to me, meant that I was serving God, and He would eventually disintegrate my opposition. Obstacles to my goal were to be considered as if they were of the devil, all because I felt that I was on the way to some great mission for God. I did not suspect at this time that most people react to such dedication with great disgust. A person who operates in this modus operandi causes others to look upon him with feelings of wonderment. When they would ask, "What will you do if you never receive the royalties from Hanna-Barbera?" I guess I would marvel at them for their lack of faith. This made them feel a little uneasy with me. What I am trying to say is that during this period I found almost no Latter-day Saint who I could feel close to, and who shared my enthusiasm for my future mission. Every time that I would get a lead on a DJ job, I would go and apply. Often after being promised the job, they would place the fatal call to KMEN again, and K-Men would tell them that I was dismissed as a religious fanatic, and I would never know why the job would suddenly evaporate. To compensate for my inability to find a job, I just relegated myself to doing simple things that I felt would further prepare me to become involved in my future mission, which I knew would have something to do with the youth of the church, according to my patriarchal blessing. I was asked to do a dance for the San Fernando stake on a regular basis. I was allowed to have complete control of this function, as the stake president wanted to see if a great missionary response could be generated as I had suggested. This then became an LDS teen club known as the Square Affair. The Square Affair was probably the most successful teenage event in the history of the church. In the first 4 weeks, we signed up over 420 non-member youths for the missionary discussions. I spent a lot of time in the recording studio trying to produce some spark that would start a fire. I finally succeeded. On March 9, 1966, I recorded the trials and tribulations of the dreaded BYU boy missionary, which was inspired by the antics of LDS missionaries. A member of the San Fernando Stake presidency asked if he could have a copy of that ridiculous song that I sang for the Square Affair crowd, so I recorded the song on the hopes that others might want a copy. 15,000 others wanted a copy. I took some of the copies to Utah to the BYU bookstore. Some unknown student, bless his heart, took the record to KCPX in Salt Lake. A non-Mormon DJ thought it was hilarious and began to play it every hour on the radio, and thus it became the largest-selling record ever in Utah. This record has become the object of a lot of heated debate about the propriety of making fun of the missionaries. Some years later, when I became a DJ at KNAC in Salt Lake, I played the record one afternoon, and I was called by a stranger who wanted to know why the station would play such a degrading record. I asked what he found to be offensive about it. He replied that all of that laughter on the record, which was probably canned, seemed to be directed at the missionary work of the church. I asked him if he had ever gone on a mission, and if anything funny ever happened on his mission. He replied, yes, as a matter of fact, a great number of hilarious things happened on my mission. I asked him if he would listen again to the record and try to determine if the laughter was directed at or with the missionaries. I just don't think it is healthy for Mormons to be so defensive. Laughter is great medicine, you know. Back in the spring of 1966, when this record was first released, I had just started dating a non-member girl who just had a terrible divorce. Both she and her beautiful daughter took the missionary lessons and wanted to be baptized, partly because some money was suddenly coming in from my hit record, and partly because I was becoming so very weary from the constant curtain of loneliness drawn around my senses. All things worked together for an unfortunate marriage. 1 year and 8 months and 14 days later, one little 4-month-old boy child named Lynn Bryson II was to disappear with his mother and my stepdaughter. Triple disasters all occurred at the same time. Number 1 in the series was the loss of my employment. I had taken a job at KGUD in Santa Barbara in order to provide an income for my new family. The station went out of business. Then the second disaster hit. The Hanna-Barbera lawsuit was put off into the distant future, so financially this was going to be a great big snag. Then the third disaster hit. I went to Utah to find employment and to get my family into a more mellow society. My wife was in need of psychiatric care. She had apparently developed schizophrenia in her nightmarish childhood, and she needed rest and good professional help. I found everything that we would need, a good job and someone to help. When I returned to Santa Barbara, I found that the local elders quorum had moved all of my furniture and my family to an undisclosed location. They did not know that she was under care of a psychiatrist and believed some rather strange stories that she had told them. I could not bear the loss of my son. I wanted to help her, but I was afraid that I could not, because she was not responding to the help that I was offering. I prayed to God longer and harder than I ever have to know what to do about this awesome development. The Lord answered my prayers with a dream. Although it has been the hardest thing I have ever had to do, I have followed the plan the Lord has shown to me. I know that the outcome will be in the best interest of all concerned, but oh, how hard to bear. I have not seen my boy since he was 2. He turned 12 on September 14, 1979. This was the date that I was given as a turning point. I know that sometime after this date I will have him again. I dreamed a dream where I saw how important it was for Joseph of old to be taken away from his father Israel, and how in the same triumphant way the Lord would bring little Lynn back to me. This helped tremendously to assuage the engulfing tide of grief. I saw that maybe this little fellow could do for her something that I could not. He was her only hope of hanging on. I saw how much grief her first husband had brought to her, and she was driven constantly to the brink of mental collapse over custody of her daughter. I wanted no part of driving her closer to the edge of the cliff with respect to her present illness, and somehow I knew that my son would be kept safe by a greater power. Here in the springtime of 1968, I saw that for several years now I had been resting in the false hope that God would surely right the wrongs of the Hanna-Barbera lawsuit. I kept hoping that I would begin to fulfill my dreams and build the studio. My dreams, however, kept getting twisted into rubble in the dying heap of a bloody court battle that was to go on draining my resources for 8 long years. I thought that I was going to drown in sorrow. Quite by chance, I read an article in the Reader's Digest. A doctor of one sort or another told of a great key to his success in counseling despairing people. He said that the key was all in getting the despairing person to change one thing. Instead of always saying, "If I could only go back and live again those moments that changed everything for the worse," a person should learn to say, "Next time I am going to do things a better way." I cannot tell you how that worked for me. It was as if some magician's wand passed over me and my heart stopped hurting. I began to pursue life as if there were no past. It did not matter to me that I was now divorced, and not a very likely candidate for any husband-seeking young LDS girl. It did not matter to me that I was ugly, broke, uneducated, or whatever. I would change one thing at a time until I was a desirable catch for some lucky girl. I moved to Utah. I got a job in Provo at KOVO. I was without a doubt the worst employee they ever had. My heart ached every day all day until I was finally laid off. I tried, but I could not defeat all of the grief. To make matters worse, while still very much on the rebound, I became engaged to a fine young lady. I think that I broke her heart when I asked if I could call off the engagement. I felt that I did not now have the ability to love her or anyone else. She certainly didn't deserve that. My confidence was being eroded more each day. I thought back to Sister Burkhead's warning dream. She had said that I had some important mission in life, but that I could be made to be unworthy for that mission if I were not careful. She had warned me that Satan would make me feel so lonely and unwanted that my virtue would seem worthless in exchange for a few moments to ease the pain of loneliness. Loneliness when you have no one who loves you is one thing, but bitter loneliness, when you have an actual pain in your heart over some heartbreaking set of circumstances that can never go away, that is entirely another. I was becoming terribly bitter. I missed my son so badly. As I grew older each day, I saw those around me who were younger, but whom God had allowed to find happiness, and this made me very bitter toward God. Had I not planned out my life to be of service to God? Then why did I not feel rewarded? Instead, I felt tortured. Oddly enough, while I was thus being dragged down in bitterness, I was frequently sought after as a fireside and youth conference speaker. If I could have any of the gifts that God offers, I would pray to be able to be a great public speaker. I enjoy the phenomenon that occurs while addressing a large body of people, how in tune the audience becomes when they are presented a single powerful idea. I studied the ability to do this in college and won several debate championships. I had always prided myself on being good at speaking, but when I would rise now to speak, I would see in the eyes of the youthful listeners their tremendous need to believe in God as a towering rock in the storm. Yet how could I offer them encouragement when I was scraping the bottom of the barrel for some of my own? I really began to need these speaking experiences because I would concentrate on telling them the several episodes of my conversion to the church and in turn would reconvert myself. The stories were all true and without a doubt were from the hand of God. Many were also converted, and this incredibly rewarding thing kept proving to me that I was sane. I was needed by God. I was not an outcast in the kingdom, and God surely had a place for me. I drifted from BYU branch to BYU branch and somehow always wound up teaching at a Sunday school class. Attendance always topped the 100 mark, and I made the remark at one of these classes that I should really spend some time thanking everyone for their attendance. It was the one thing in my life that made me feel sane. In a short time, I was dating another young lady at BYU. In December 1968, she returned to her home from BYU for Christmas. On Christmas Eve, being the kind of lonely that only Christmas Eve can make you feel, I called to her home on the phone. My entire BYU branch had gone home for the holidays, and it was made shockingly clear to me that I was already home and that I was the only one there. I thought this phone call would pick me up. Instead, it was one of the most devastating things that I have ever had happen to me. This young lady's mother grabbed the phone away from her daughter and sneered, "Sir, we have heard all that we need to know about you, and we would thank you to leave our daughter alone. We think that she is a little too good for you. After all, you're just second-hand." This was my Christmas Eve, 1968. For the next 2 weeks I had to fight away the emotion that kept telling me that the only reason I did not commit suicide was that I did not have the nerve. I wanted so badly to die, and I know the depth of despair that makes some people just crawl into a corner and extinguish themselves. On the night of January the 7th, 1969, this young girl and I were together again. We argued all night. It had been 9 long years since Sister Burkhead had foretold that this night, this moment of pain and anguish would come for me. At a time like this, Satan keeps hollering in your mind this single phrase over and over, "What has being good ever done for you?" All of the hurt in your body makes you want to give up and try a whole new lifestyle. This is the moment of truth in the testimony war. This is the front line, the trench, and the smell of death. The shots are being fired just over your head now, and you have got to stay on your knees or be killed. I had 9 long years to prepare for this moment, when I would have to face the challenge that Sister Burkhead's dream had promised would surely come. I had to still believe that I had a mission in life, and though it would appear to many that I had for some reason already been counted out by the Lord, and that there may be no mission at all, I had to still believe and keep myself pure or throw it all away. Such a test as this, you do not win in one night. You have to keep on winning night after night. So I decided to get completely away from this girl. 2 weeks later, the test was becoming more and more agonizing. I was now working for KNAK in Salt Lake City. I found myself sitting in the announcer's booth at KNAK, having a very difficult time sounding happy on the radio. Frankly, I was very near the edge of giving up in the battle that I had been winning for my entire life. Just then the Lord sent in his first-rank shock troops. A phone call was coming through from command headquarters. An older lady whom I had learned to trust was calling long distance from out of state. She said with a flicker in her voice, "Lynn, we've been so worried about you. Where were you on the night of January the 7th? We were very frightened by a dream that I had about you that night. There was some girl in the dream, and she was making you cry. The devil was standing on your chest. He was giving a loud, triumphant screech." When I explained to her what had happened, there was no small amount of tears. She extolled, "Lynn, you think that the Lord has left you, don't you? He most certainly has not. How could I have dreamed this dream on the very night you were in the throes of anguish, unless it was by the inspiration of the Lord? This should be a proof to you that he cares, and is watching you to see if you are worthy to fill the mission you have desired so long. You will achieve your mission by the grace of God, and therefore don't let Satan convince you that you have been forgotten. Any true Latter-day Saint mother would be grateful to have such a son-in-law as you. The right girl will come. You must be patient. She will be a perfect reward for all that you have tried to do for the Lord. God loves you, or how could I have dreamed this dream 1,000 miles away? And on she went, until my eyes could burn no more. I had the pure love of God loving a wretch like me. The rest of 1969 was as dramatic as this first month. To begin with, there was a friend named Jim Gibson who had just inherited a small bankroll of $40,000. He asked, "Why wait for the Hanna-Barbera lawsuit? Why not just start right now? I've got some of the money that you will need." We formed our game plan around a house for sale in Provo. It contained several apartments that would make for pretty good income, and it had a nice big carriage house out back that would make a perfect studio. The rooms would provide rental income so we could convert the $40,000 into much more as we struggled with the studio and built it piece by piece. A studio at last, we thought. We need only $11,000 down on this $60,000 home. A very large home in Provo would sell back then for about $45,000. So you can see that this was a biggie. When I prayed about our plans, I got a definite no. Jim was really upset. I consoled him by offering an alternate plan. We could go to Salt Lake City, and there we both could function as booking agents in conjunction with my DJ job at KNAK. We both decided to fast concerning the choice between these two plans. In mid-February, I told Jim that I had a direct answer. I felt strongly that we should get an apartment in Salt Lake City and just forget about the recording studio for now. I knew that it was not time for me to have that studio yet, and the Lord would give Jim a sign that I was right. Jim marveled a little at this, but he told me that on his mission he had the experience of speaking in tongues while in Hong Kong, so he was willing to admit that anything was possible. But a sign? Are you sure? I told him that the sign would be that something about the apartment that we would find would tell us why we shouldn't get the house in Provo. Jim expectedly scoffed. What possible relationship could exist between an apartment in Salt Lake and a house in Provo? Jim, I don't suppose there is any possible connection unless the Lord wants you to know that you would be doing the wrong thing to get that house in Provo. After 3 hours of searching that evening for an apartment in Salt Lake City, we returned to the first one that we had seen. Upon handing a check to Milo Warner for his apartment, he said, "Oh, I see by your check that you boys are from Provo. I used to own a big old house down there. I sold it for $35,000 a few years back. I understand that the fellow who has it now is selling it for $60,000. This couldn't be, but it was. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a picture of the very house. Then he continued without prompting from us, "I'll tell you boys that whoever buys that house had better have a bankroll big enough to choke a horse. That house is built on a sandstone foundation. The plumbing is all wrong. It needs a massive overhaul. It isn't worth the ground it sets on unless a person has the money to restore it, and that would be a gamble at best." We stared at the picture of the house, then at each other, and Jim had his sign.